In the twinkling of an eye. Synopsis. Ethan and Claire Matthews lived a life that, to the outside world, seemed whole. Claire, a devout follower of Christ, spent her days teaching their children, Emily and Daniel, to love the Lord with all their hearts. Ethan, on the other hand, believed in God but never surrendered his life fully. His faith was shallow, his prayers routine, and his relationship with Christ distant. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The rapture came. Claire and Emily vanished in the blink of an eye, taken into the glorious presence of God. Ethan and Daniel, along with millions across the world, were left behind to witness the beginning of the Great Tribulation, a time of unspeakable horror, deception, and divine judgment. Now, Ethan and Daniel must navigate a collapsing world where chaos reigns, lawlessness abounds, and a charismatic leader, Adrian Lucero, rises to power with promise of peace. But Ethan knows better. He's read the prophecies. Lucero is no ordinary man. He is the Antichrist. As food and resources dwindle, as betrayals and persecution increase, and as the world spirals into darkness, Ethan is faced with an impossible choice. Take the mark of the beast and live under Lucero's rule, or resist and face certain death. Meanwhile, in heaven, Claire and Emily witness God's divine plan unfolding. They see the torment on earth, the suffering of those left behind, and the approaching wrath of God. Though in perfect peace, Claire's heart longs for Ethan and Daniel's salvation, praying desperately that they will resist the deception and find true faith before it's too late. With every passing day, judgment draws nearer. The tribulation intensifies. Those who refuse the mark are hunted, and Ethan and Daniel must go on the run, joining a secret network of Christians determined to stand firm in their faith, even if it costs them their lives. Will Ethan's newfound faith be strong enough to withstand the horrors to come? Will Daniel, while still a child, survive in a world that seeks to destroy him? And will Claire and Emily reunite with their family in eternity? Or will the darkness claim them first? One thing is certain, the time of grace has ended. Chapter 1. The moment the world stopped. The morning was like any other. Ethan Matthews sat at the kitchen table, scrolling mindlessly through the news on his phone, the soft clink of his wife's coffee mug against the counter, filling the space between them. Claire hummed a worship song under her breath, her golden hair pulled into a loose bun, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon wrapping around him like an embrace. Their children, 13-year-old Daniel and 8-year-old Emily, were still in their rooms. It was a rare Saturday morning where time seemed to stretch instead of sprint. "You know," Claire said, turning to him with a smile, "Pastor Gibbons' sermon last week was powerful. He spoke about how we need to be ready at all times because Jesus could return at any moment." Ethan smirked, setting his phone down. "Claire, you've been saying that for years. If he was coming back, don't you think you would have done it by now?" She sighed, sadness flickering in her eyes before she covered it with a patient smile. "It's not about when, Ethan. It's about being ready." Her words tugged at something inside of him, but he shrugged it off. He went to church with her, after all. He said grace before meals. That was enough, wasn't it? Emily came skipping into the kitchen, her blonde curls bouncing, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Mommy, do you think Jesus will come today?" Claire knelt down and brushed her hair from her face. "Maybe, sweetheart. And if he does, we'll be ready." A single moment stretched into eternity. Then the world shattered. The taking. It was as if the very fabric of reality folded on itself. A flash, not a light, but of something beyond light. A pulling, a calling, a rushing wind that carried with it a sound of 1,000 trumpets, shaking the very core of existence. Claire gasped as warmth filled her from the inside out, her heart soaring as if set free from the confines of her body. The walls of her kitchen blurred, her knees buckled, but she did not fall. Instead, she rose. Euphoria, unlike anything she'd ever known, engulfed her as she was lifted into the sky, light wrapping around her like a cocoon. She heard her name, not with her ears, but from within the depths of her soul as the voice of her Savior called her home. Her last earthly thought was of Ethan and her children. Then she was gone. The left behind. Ethan barely had time to blink before the warmth of Claire's presence was replaced with the unbearable void. The sound of Emily's joyful giggle cut off mid-breath. Silence. Then chaos. A scream ripped from Ethan's throat as he stumbled back, his chair crashing on the floor. The kitchen was empty. Claire's coffee cup lay shattered on the tile, the dark liquid seeping into the cracks like spilled blood. Emily's tiny slippers remained where she had stood, the fabric still holding the shape of her small feet, yet she was gone. Panic seized his chest as he whirled toward the hallway. Daniel! Emily! Daniel appeared wild-eyed, his face pale with terror. Dad! Where's Mom? Where's Emily? Ethan couldn't speak. His breath came in short gasps as he staggered toward the front door, wrenching it open. The world was unraveling. Cars were wrecked, unmanned vehicles skidding into one another. Screams filled the air as people ran, their faces twisted in horror. A plane overhead wobbled dangerously before nosediving beyond the horizon. A fireball erupted where it crashed. All around, clothing lay in heaps on sidewalks and streets. Shirts, shoes, jewelry, as if the people wearing them had simply evaporated. The church bells across town tolled, but not in a joyous worship. Their hollow clang was a mourning cry. Ethan's knees buckled and dropped to the porch, his hands digging into his hair. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. Daniel stood frozen beside him. Dad, is this the rapture? The word sent a jolt of dread through Ethan's soul. The rapture. The event Claire had just warned him about. The moment when Jesus would take his people, and those left behind would face the worst tribulation the world had ever known. He turned, chest heaving. No, it can't be. We go to church. We believe in Jesus. Daniel's face crumpled. Then why are we still here? The gathering in the clouds. Claire's spirit soared through endless light, her new body weightless, whole. Below her, the earth shrank, fading into the distance as she ascended. The sound of worship filled the heavens. Thousands, millions surrounded her, clothed in white, faces radiant with joy. A voice like rushing waters and rolling thunder spoke, and all creation trembled. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she fell to her knees before the one she had longed to see. The one who had saved her, carried her, and called her home. Jesus. His name was all she could say, all she had ever needed to say. Then, among the countless redeemed, she saw Emily. The little girl ran to her, eyes wide with wonder. Mommy, we're with Jesus. Claire gathered her daughter in her arms, laughing, crying, overwhelmed by sheer glory of it all. But even in her perfect joy, a whisper of sorrow remained. Ethan, Daniel, still on earth. The aftermath. Back on earth, Ethan rocked back and forth, his mind unraveling. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. He had played church, he had spoken the words, nodded at the sermons, but he had never surrendered, never truly given his heart to Christ. And now Claire was gone, Emily was gone, and he and Daniel were left behind. The world around them descended into madness. Looting had already begun. The news was in a frenzy, reporters barely able to contain their panic. Government scrambled for answers. Conspiracy theories ran rampant, and fear clung to the air like smoke. Ethan turned to Daniel, gripping his son's shoulders. We weren't ready, son, but we can be now. We have to be. No more playing church. No more pretending. We have to seek him now while there's still time. Daniel swallowed hard, his youthful face lined with sudden understanding. Will he still take us? Ethan clenched his jaw, the weight of conviction settling in his bones. I don't know, but I know we'll never stop trying. And so, as the world burned and the days of tribulation began, A father and son knelt in the ruins of their once perfect life, crying out to the God that they had ignored for far too long. The sky above them darkened, and the real horror was only beginning. Chapter 2. The beginning of the end. Ethan and Daniel knelt on the floor, their fingers gripping the fabric of the couch, their foreheads pressed into the hardwood. The prayer that poured from Ethan's lips was raw, desperate. It was not the polished, rehearsed prayers he had once spoken before meals or during a Sunday service. This was pleading of a man who had just lost everything. God, please, his voice cracked. I see now. I see what I missed. Forgive me. Forgive me for pretending, for not truly knowing you. I don't want to be left behind. I don't want to die without you. Beside him, Daniel sniffed, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to be with Mom and Emily. The silence that followed was suffocating. No comforting whisper of peace. No supernatural warmth. No sudden assurance of salvation. Only the distant sounds of sirens, screams, and the crumbling of the world outside their door. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes rimmed with red. We have to get a Bible. We have to find out what happens next. Daniel nodded but did not move. He sat, staring at the empty coffee cup that was crashed on the floor, the shattered pieces of Claire's presents littering the floor alongside of the cup. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt completely and utterly alone. And then the power went out. The world without light. A deep, eerie stillness swallowed the house as the lights flickered, then died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The ceiling fan groaned and slowed. The digital clock on the microwave blinked once before vanishing into darkness. Daniel stiffened. Dad? Ethan exhaled sharply. It's okay. Probably just a citywide outage. The grid's overloaded with everything happening. But he knew. Deep in his gut, he knew. They weren't dealing with just a blackout. The world was descending into darkness. He got up, grabbed his phone, but the screen was frozen. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no way to reach anyone. He rushed to the front door and threw it open. The street was in ruins. Car alarms wailed into the night, their flashing lights painting the chaos in red and white strobes. Neighbors staggered outside, dazed, screaming names into the void. A woman ran past, clutching a phone that wouldn't turn on, her breath coming in frantic gasps. Fires burned in the distance. The news had warned it of it before, how the Rapture would trigger global catastrophe. Pilots had vanished from cockpits mid-flight. Drivers had disappeared from cars going 70 miles per hour on the highway. Machines had kept running, but the people controlling them had not. The world wasn't just in shock, it was unraveling. The first night. Ethan locked the doors, barricaded the windows. He grabbed a flashlight and dug through the hallway closet until his fingers brushed against the leather cover of Claire's Bible. She had read it every day, marked its pages with notes and prayers, and he had never cared. Now as he flipped through the fragile pages, the weight of its words crushed him. 2 will be in the field, 1 will be taken, the other left. Matthew 24:40. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17. Ethan clenched his jaw. We should have been ready, he muttered. Daniel sat next to him, knees drawn to his chest. What do we do now? Ethan turned the page. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand, on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark. Revelation 13:16-17. His stomach twisted. The Antichrist, the mark of the beast, the Great Tribulation. They were about to live through the worst period in human history, and there was no escape. The next morning, a pounding at the door jolted Ethan awake. He had fallen asleep in the living room, the Bible still open on his lap. Daniel stirred beside him. "Who is that?" Ethan rose slowly, heart hammering. Through the peephole, he saw a man, Mike Reynolds, their next-door neighbor. His face was pale and his eyes bloodshot. Ethan hesitated, then cracked the door open. Mike's voice was hoarse. "Did Claire?" Ethan swallowed hard. "She's gone." Mike nodded grimly, shoving a trembling hand through his hair. "Amy, too. And the kids. Just gone. I don't know what to do, man. I went to church. I believed in God. But I never thought..." His voice broke. Ethan felt a sickening sense of recognition. Mike was just like him, a man who had worn the mask of faith but never surrendered. "We were left behind," Ethan whispered. A silence stretched between them, heavy with regret. Then another sound, a distant boom, a series of gunshots, a woman's scream. Ethan's breath turned shallow. The world is not safe anymore. Mike nodded. "People are already losing it. Stores are getting ransacked. Gas stations are dry. There's talk on the radio about new leadership stepping in, some guy making promises." Ethan stiffened. The Antichrist. Mike's face twisted. "You think?" Ethan gestured to the Bible. "It's all in here." Mike exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "So what do we do? Do we just wait for them to come for us?" "No." Ethan's grip tightened on the Bible. "We prepare. We find food, water. We protect ourselves. But most importantly, we don't take the mark, no matter what." Mike's jaw tensed. "And then?" Ethan's eyes burned with resolve. "And then we fight to stay faithful until the end." A gust of wind rattled the house. Outside, the sky was darkening again, and Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The heavens above. In the presence of the Almighty, Claire stood with Emily, surrounded by millions of souls who had been taken. There was no fear, no sorrow, only joy beyond human comprehension. And yet, deep in her heart, she longed for Ethan and Daniel. She fell to her knees before the throne of God, lifting her voice in a single, desperate plea. "Lord, let them find you before it's too late." And far below, in the broken ruins of the world, a man who had once been blind finally began to see.